I'm a single mother, and I agreed to bathe a millionaire to help my son. What happened next shocked me.
I never thought my life would take the turns it did that night. My name is Alec Rose, and if someone had told me months ago that I would be standing in a mansion, trembling in the presence of a man I barely knew, I would have laughed, bitterly maybe. But life doesn't hand out choices neatly. Sometimes it throws you into moments you never asked for, where every decision carries a weight you can feel in your bones. And that night, every breath I took was heavy with the kind of fear and hope I hadn't known I was capable of carrying. It all started with my son. He's only 6, but he's my whole world. Watching him sleep at night, hearing his soft breathing, and knowing he trusts me with everything. That's the kind of love that keeps you going when the world seems determined to push you down. I worked long hours at 2 different jobs, cleaning floors and washing dishes, running errands I never thought I'd have to. Some days, I barely had enough to buy groceries, and yet somehow, every day I found a way to smile when he came home from school, telling me about the small victories of his day. I've always believed in hard work, in sacrifice. But there's a limit to what you can endure before life forces you into choices you'd never imagined making. That limit crept closer with every unpaid bill, every eviction notice, every whispered comment from strangers who looked at me like I was invisible. And then, the opportunity came. Though calling it an opportunity felt strange, almost dangerous. It was a letter, unmarked, slipped under my door like it had been waiting for me. I hesitated for hours before opening it, my hands shaking as if they already knew what the words inside might demand. The letter promised help, a chance to change everything for my son and me. But it came with no instructions, only a time and a place. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself it was a scam, a cricket, will joke, a mistake. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the possibilities, the relief, the freedom, the life my son deserved. And then I imagined the price. Every instinct I had screamed that I should walk away, but love has a way of silencing fear, if only for a moment. And so I decided, I would go. Whatever it demanded, I would face it for him. The next evening, I arrived at the address in the letter. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. A mansion that seemed to stretch endlessly, walls glistening under chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. I froze at the doorstep, my heart hammering so loudly I thought it might echo through the hallways. Every instinct told me to turn around, to run back to my small apartment, to the safety of ordinary struggle. But I couldn't. Not when my son's future hung in the balance. Inside, he was waiting. The man whose name I'd heard whispered in boardrooms, in magazines, in conversations I wasn't meant to be a part of. He didn't smile, didn't greet me warmly. He simply observed, and I felt the weight of his gaze, sharp and precise, cutting through my courage like a knife. I tried to steady my hands, remind myself that I belonged here for a purpose, that nothing could shake me. But it wasn't just his presence. It was the unspoken expectations, the subtle ways the air seemed to remind me I was not one of them. The tasks began simply enough, but even small movements carried meaning here. I learned quickly that every hesitation, every mistake, was noted. The chandeliers reflected more than light. They reflected every tiny error I made, magnifying it, making me feel exposed in a way I had never felt before. And yet, I pressed on. I reminded myself why I was there. Him, my son. Every ounce of fear was bottled, tucked away, replaced by a resolve so fierce it surprised even me. And then came the first whispers of judgment. Not words meant to wound, not exactly, but heavy with implication. Every glance I received carried a silent question. Can you really belong here? Are you worthy of what you want? My hands trembled, but I kept moving. Each step a battle between fear and necessity. It was exhausting, terrifying, and somehow exhilarating in a way I couldn't describe. I was alive in a way I hadn't been in years, because survival had a sharp, urgent edge that ordinary days never demanded. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Time became irrelevant as the mansion's walls seemed to press closer, reminding me of the delicate balance I was walking. One false step, one wrong glance, and I could ruin everything I had fought so hard for. But I also began to notice something strange, a glimmer of humanity in him, the man I had feared. Perhaps he was curious, perhaps he was testing me. But it became clear that this night would not end quietly, and neither would I. Then it happened, the first small, shocking twist that I had never anticipated. Something shifted in the room, something subtle but powerful, that changed the entire dynamic in an instant. My pulse spiked. I froze. Every lesson, every step, every careful choice seemed suddenly inadequate. And yet, beneath the fear, a fire ignited inside me, a mixture of determination, defiance, and the fierce, unshakable love I carried for my son. I realized then that I could face whatever came next, because it wasn't just about me anymore. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what I didn't yet know, feeling the weight of every moment I had ever lived and every hope I had yet to see fulfilled. And just as the tension reached its peak, I understood. This night, this choice, would change my life forever. There was no turning back, no retreat. Only the uncertain path ahead. I stepped further into the mansion, every creaking floorboard echoing louder than it should have, like the walls themselves were watching me. My palms were sweaty, my heart threatening to burst through my chest. I told myself to stay calm, to focus. But the weight of everything pressed down on me, heavier than the chandeliers above, heavier than the polished floors, heavier than the impossibly large windows that looked out over a world I had never imagined could be mine. I was a single mother, a girl from a small, struggling neighborhood, and now I was standing in a place where wealth and power could swallow anyone whole. The man, whose name I still barely dared to say aloud, watched me closely. His gaze was sharp, intelligent, calculating. I tried to remind myself that this was part of the deal, that I had chosen this path, that all of it, the fear, the trembling, the sense of being out of place, was just a price I had to pay for my son's future. But knowing it and feeling it were two very different things. My muscles tensed as he gestured toward the first task. Simple at first glance, but loaded with invisible rules. Every step I took, every motion I made, was scrutinized, as if even the air could betray me. Time stretched. Hours felt like days. I became acutely aware of how powerless I was, how small I seemed in a world that seemed to care so little for people like me. His words were measured, almost polite, but I could feel the judgment beneath them, subtle reminders of the distance between us. I had faced hard days before, days that left me aching and desperate, but never like this. Never under such a piercing, watchful gaze, where the stakes were higher than just my pride. My son's future rested in my ability to endure, to survive, to navigate this invisible maze of expectations. And then the subtle tests began. It was never about the obvious tasks. It was the pauses, questions he didn't ask, the small shifts in tone that made my heart jump. He would watch me rearrange something, fold a cloth, adjust a surface, and I could feel him judging everything. Was I competent enough? Was I worthy? The questions were silent, but their impact was deafening. I bit my lip, forcing myself to keep moving, forcing myself not to collapse under the weight of a world that seemed designed to remind me I didn't belong. At one point, he spoke quietly, almost conversationally, but the words were loaded. "You're capable, but are you prepared?" The subtle implication hit me like a punch. My breath caught. Every instinct screamed that there was more here than I understood. I had agreed to this for my son, yes, but the reality of it was more than I had imagined. I realized then that I was learning a harsh truth. Sometimes, survival isn't just about endurance. It's about reading people, predicting them, and keeping your composure even when your insides are screaming. The night grew darker, both outside and within me. Every task became a gauntlet of emotion. I felt fear, humiliation, anger, and yet also a stubborn resolve. I refused to let this man, this situation break me. Not when the one person I cared about most depended entirely on me. And then, almost without warning, something happened that made my chest seize. A comment, a gesture, small, almost imperceptible, but enough to shift the balance of the room. The air grew thicker, my pulse skyrocketed, and for a moment I felt completely exposed, like a bird caught in a storm, wings trapped. I froze. The seconds felt like hours. I tried to steady my breathing, to remind myself that panic would accomplish nothing. And yet, beneath the fear, something remarkable began to emerge. A strange mixture of courage and anger surged inside me. I realized that I had endured worse nights than this. I had fought battles no one knew about, survived nights when the world had seemed impossible. This was another challenge, yes, but it was one I could face, one I would face, because running away would never secure my son's future. As the tension stretched, the night seemed to twist around me. I noticed the smallest details, the subtle flicker of his expression, the way his eyes lingered just a moment too long, the soft creak of a door closing somewhere in the mansion. Each small moment carried enormous weight. Every choice, every movement, every heartbeat was a test. And with every passing second, I felt the duality of my reality, terrifying and exhilarating at once. I was terrified of failing, but I also knew that failure was not an option. Not here. Not now. Hours passed, and fatigue gnawed at me, threatening to undo all the courage I had managed to muster. But just when I thought I had mastered the delicate rhythm of endurance, the unexpected struck again. Something minor, a slip of an object, a stumble, a glance that lingered too long, sent shockwaves through the room. His reaction was subtle but immediate. My stomach dropped. Every step I had taken, every choice I had made, suddenly felt like it might unravel everything. And yet, despite the fear, despite the trembling in my hands and the tightness in my chest, I realized something vital. I wasn't powerless. I had survived this far. I had protected my son through exhaustion, judgment, and moments that had felt unbearable. That strength, the determination, the love that fueled every decision, was unstoppable. Even when the world tried to remind me of my place, I refused to bow. I would endure. I would survive. And I would fight for my son, no matter the cost. By the time the first hints of dawn crept through the windows, I felt a strange, uneasy triumph. I had passed tests I didn't know I could, endured pressures I hadn't thought possible. But the night wasn't over. Not yet. The true challenge, the one that would define everything, was still coming. Something inside me whispered that this wasn't just about endurance anymore. It was about confrontation, about a choice I hadn't fully realized I would have to make. And as I paused for a brief moment, taking a shaky breath and steadying my pulse, I knew deep down that everything was about to change. The unexpected was coming, and there was no turning back. By the time I realized what was happening, the room had shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Every step I had taken, every careful move I had made, suddenly felt like it had led me to the edge of a precipice I hadn't even seen. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and my heart raced so fast I thought it might burst through my chest. The man, his presence always commanding, always watchful, now seemed almost predatory. His eyes sharp, searching, weighing everything I did. I had been careful for hours, meticulous in every movement, yet here I was, standing at the brink of a moment I couldn't have predicted, and my chest tightened with fear I had never known before. It started with a single, subtle remark. One of those lines that seems harmless at first, but carries a weight that crushes the chest. "You're capable, but are you ready?" His words were calm, almost polite, but I felt the underlying implication like a knife. The mansion, with its glittering chandeliers and polished floors, seemed to shrink around me. I was acutely aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every tremor in my hands. I had faced hardships before, long nights, endless work, small humiliations, but nothing prepared me for this. This was different. This was a test not just of endurance, but of spirit, of courage, of the depths of my love for my son. And then it escalated. What had started as quiet observation became something more. Subtle shifts in tone, veiled impatience, the way his eyes lingered just a fraction too long on a mistake I hadn't intended. It was almost imperceptible, yet the impact was immediate and brutal. Fear and anger collided inside me. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't. Not now. Not when my son's future depended entirely on my ability to navigate this impossible situation. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to continue, each movement deliberate, calculated, and tense. Suddenly, the unexpected struck in a way that left me momentarily frozen. Something small, a misplaced object, a slip of my hand, set off a reaction I hadn't foreseen. The room went silent, the air thickening with tension so heavy it pressed against my skin. His gaze intensified, and I felt the full weight of the power imbalance between us. It wasn't just about the task anymore. It was about control, judgment, and an unspoken authority I had no choice but to obey. Every muscle in my body tensed as I realized the stakes had grown beyond comprehension. One wrong move now could undo everything. I felt panic rising, an almost physical force threatening to pull me under. My mind raced. How could I recover? How could I continue without faltering? And yet, amidst the fear, something extraordinary happened. A spark ignited within me, a mixture of defiance, courage, and fierce, unwavering love. I reminded myself of why I was here, of the small, laughing boy waiting for me at home, and the fear began to transform into something powerful. I refused to let this situation defeat me. I had survived harder nights, endured more judgment, and faced greater obstacles than anyone could know. This, as terrifying as it was another hurdle I could overcome. The tension escalated with each passing moment. Every glance, every gesture, every breath became loaded with meaning. I could feel the unspoken expectations pressing down on me like a tangible force. My pulse thundered in my ears, and yet I pressed forward, determined to maintain control of my own body and spirit. I realized then that the ordeal was not merely about obedience or performance. It was about resilience, about the ability to endure emotional and psychological pressure, about protecting the one person who mattered more than anything, my son. And then came the breaking point. A single act, minor but monumental, shifted the entire dynamic. My hands froze mid-motion, my breath caught, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath with me. The man's expression flickered, an emotion too complex to name, blending surprise, curiosity, and something I couldn't decipher. Time itself seemed to stretch, seconds elongating into eternities, as I realized the consequences of this moment would ripple far beyond the walls of the mansion. I felt my chest tighten with fear, my legs trembling, yet beneath it all, an unshakable resolve took hold. This was not the moment to falter. This was the moment to endure, to confront, and to survive. I focused on my son, on the sacrifices that had brought me here, and on the strength that had carried me through every hardship before this. In that instant, I understood that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the determination to move forward despite it. Then, almost imperceptibly, the tension shifted. The test, the judgment, the invisible walls pressing in on me, all of it seemed to pivot. I realized that I had reached a turning point. The night, the fear, the scrutiny, and the expectations all converged into a single, life-altering moment. I was no longer merely reacting. I was asserting my own presence, claiming a sense of agency I hadn't known I possessed. And as the seconds ticked forward, I understood that nothing would ever be the same. That night, that choice, and that moment would define me forever. Every fear faced, every humiliation endured, every heartbeat of courage had led to this instant. And I knew deep down that whatever happened next would change not only my life, but the very way I saw the world and myself. When the ordeal finally ended, stepped away from the mansion, my legs weak, my body trembling, yet a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. I had survived the night, survived the scrutiny, the fear, and the subtle, suffocating pressures that had made every second feel unbearable. I had faced moments that tested not just my endurance, but my spirit, my heart, my very sense of self. And somehow, I had made it through. I walked slowly down the long driveway, the dawn breaking softly over the horizon, casting gentle light on the world that had seemed so unattainable just hours before. In the quiet of the early morning, I realized that I had discovered something profound about myself. Strength. I hadn't known existed surged within me, forged in fear, tempered by love, and sharpened by necessity. For my son, I had gone further than I thought possible. I had endured what many would have run from, and I had emerged not broken, but stronger. Yet even in that fragile victory, the memory of the mansion lingered. I couldn't forget the subtle judgments, the unspoken hierarchies, and the invisible barriers that reminded me, over and over, that no matter how capable I was, the world often measured people not by heart, by courage, or by love, but by wealth, status, and societal privilege. That night had revealed a truth I already knew deep down, yet had not fully felt. Inequality and injustice are everywhere, often disguised, sometimes subtle, but always real. I thought of my son as I walked home, imagining him asleep, dreaming his innocent dreams. I wondered how many families like ours faced impossible choices every single day. Choices where love demanded sacrifices the world would never see or understand. I wondered how many people were forced into situations where courage alone determined survival. and how often those struggles went unnoticed. Even as I returned to our modest apartment, I carried the echoes of that night with me. The fear, the tension, the humiliation, but also the triumph, the courage, and the clarity. It was a night that changed me forever. It was a reminder that strength doesn't come from ease or comfort, but from facing the unimaginable and refusing to be defeated. And it was a reminder that love, the fierce, unyielding love for someone else, can propel a person to endure more than they ever thought possible. But there's another truth I cannot ignore. The world is not fair. The structures that push people like me to the edges, that demand impossible sacrifices, remain in place. The night showed me that resilience alone is not enough. Empathy, justice, and awareness are needed to change the cycle of inequality. And so, my story is not just my own. It belongs to countless others who face similar trials, who navigate invisible forces stacked against them, who survive with quiet courage that no one applauds. As I tucked my son into bed that morning, his small hand resting in mine, I asked myself, how many other children and parents are struggling in silence? How many hearts are forced to endure what I did, without recognition, without support? The questions weighed on me, pressing against the edges of the fragile calm I had found. But they also ignited a determination to not let this night, this struggle, be meaningless. To remember, to reflect, and to share, so that others might see, might understand, and perhaps might act. And so I tell this story, not for pity, not for applause, but because it matters. Because the world needs to hear that behind every act of endurance, behind every quiet struggle, there is a human heart filled with fear, hope, love, and courage. Because sometimes we need to see the truth of inequality, to feel its weight, and to question how we can do better. That night, I survived, but I was not unchanged. The fear, the pressure, the realization of how differently the world treats people, it stayed with me. And yet, in that very struggle, I discovered a power I didn't know I had. I discovered that love above all else can move mountains. And as I look back, I cannot help but ask, how far would we go to protect those we love? And what will we do when we see injustice in the world? My story, our story, is a reminder. Courage is born in adversity. Love is tested in impossible circumstances. And while the world may be harsh and unfair, resilience, determination, and heart will always shine through. And if one person, even after seeing this story, pauses to reflect, to empathize, to act, then perhaps the suffering of so many can begin to mean something. The days after that night felt strange, almost surreal. I returned to our small apartment with my son, carrying him in my arms as if holding onto the world itself. The city outside moved in its usual rhythm, cars honking, people rushing, lives continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for me, everything had shifted. I had survived fear, endured judgment, faced humiliation, and come through with a strength I hadn't known existed. Yet, I also carried a weight, a deep awareness of the injustices that lingered unseen, shaping lives quietly, unfairly, mercilessly. I watched my son play in the living room, his laughter bright and untainted, and felt a fierce surge of gratitude. He was safe, for now. That knowledge alone gave me courage. But I also knew that the world outside wasn't fair to people like us. I had glimpsed it, the invisible barriers, the subtle disdain, the unspoken rules that determined who belonged and who did not. And though I had navigated it successfully this time, I knew that countless others endured similar trials without hope, without support, without anyone noticing. As I prepared breakfast the next morning, my mind wandered back to that mansion. The chandeliers, the polished floors, the quiet tension, the veiled glances that made every heartbeat feel like it could betray me. I remembered the way the man had scrutinized every meal, ocean, every decision, as though weighing my soul itself. I remembered the fear, the adrenaline, the sudden shifts that made each second unpredictable. And I remembered the spark inside me, the courage, the defiance, the determination that refused to let fear dictate my actions. That spark, I realized, was unbreakable. It belonged to me, and it belonged to every parent who has ever fought for a child, every person forced to endure what the world unfairly demands. Over the following days, I thought about the lessons I had learned. Strength isn't just measured by what you survive. It's measured by the love that drives you to survive. It's measured by the choices you make when fear and desperation threaten to paralyze you. That night had been terrifying, humiliating, and exhausting, but it had also revealed the core of who I am. I was resilient. I was courageous. I was a mother willing to face the impossible for her child. And yet, I couldn't ignore the larger truth. Inequality and injustice are not distant problems. They are alive, quietly shaping every life they touch. My story was just one example. One life intersecting with power and privilege in a way that exposed the stark reality many face daily. I had been lucky in some ways. I had survived and found strength. But so many others do not get that chance. And that reality haunted me more than the fear of that night ever could. I looked at my son, brushing crumbs from his cheek, and asked myself, how many children and parents face impossible decisions every day, with no hope, no chance, no one to guide them? How many people navigate worlds stacked against them, measured not by their hearts or their courage, but by birth, by wealth, by circumstance? And how many silently endure, carrying scars the world will never see? These questions are heavy, but they are necessary. They remind us to pay attention, to empathize, to echo. I shared my story because it matters, not for recognition, not for sympathy, but because the truth needs to be seen. The courage, the fear, the love, the injustice, they are real, they are human, and they are everywhere. Every act of endurance, every small triumph, every moment of defiance against a world that undervalues you is powerful. And if my story inspires even one person to reflect, to question, to recognize the quiet struggles around them, then perhaps something meaningful can come from all the fear and pain. I realized that life would continue to challenge me, to test me in ways I could not predict. But I also knew this: I am stronger than I knew. My love for my son is unstoppable. My courage is real, and the lessons of that night will stay with me forever. Reminders that even in a world that is often cruel, unfair, and harsh, resilience, determination, and heart can prevail. And so I ask you, as you listen to this story, what would you do for the ones you love? How far would you go to protect them, to fight for them, to endure the impossible? How will you respond when you see injustice, when you see inequality, when the world demands more than seems fair? Because the truth is, this story isn't just mine. It's a reflection of countless lives, countless struggles, and countless moments where courage meets the unimaginable. That night changed me, shaped me, and revealed what I am truly capable of. And even though the fear and tension will linger in memory, the strength I discovered will never leave me. It is a part of who I am, who my son is, and who I will always strive to be. And if this story moves you, even a little, to reflect, to empathize, or to act, then perhaps the struggles of the past and the hardships of the present can begin to carry meaning, purpose, and hope. Because in the end, survival is not just about enduring. It is about living fully, fiercely, and with love that refuses to surrender, no matter how impossible the circumstances may seem.